WCW, Who Killed WCW episode 4. I think that by the end of the series, I was like, this thing is an abomination.
Yeah, this is god
So,
awful.
yeah. So, and you know what? And I always really dig the guys that make this show. I think by them joining forces with Ad Free Shows and by them joining forces with Brian Gewirtz and $7 Entertainment, all of them who are just so super friendly with Eric Bischoff. This went from trying to be like a truthful retelling of who killed WCW and maybe even answering that question, which they didn't do. They didn't answer the question. And they really just tried to repair the image of one Eric Bischoff. So by the end, by the end of it, it was like, yes, Vince Russo is still dumb. They gave Vince Russo an opportunity to explain himself, but he made himself sound stupider. And they gave 3 episodes to Eric Bischoff where he was basically putting culpability on everybody else other than himself.
I said it in week 1 when we did this. This is going to be the Eric Bischoff Reclamation Project. And that's what it was. And now there's a bunch of people. Fortunately, the ratings aren't that good for this thing. So there's not that many people that will watch this and will, be, converted. But there are like the ad-free show idiots that choose to listen to Eric Bischoff every single week. There's professional wrestlers that work for him that didn't even like listening to him for a single week, let alone people that dedicate 2 hours of their week every single week to listening to the ramblings of an incompetent idiot. And, for those people, you're lost to begin with. But what a waste of time and effort and energy.
Yeah, so episode 4, what I did like about it, and I'll talk about what I did like. I did like seeing that unreleased footage from the cameraman.
That's cool.
Going on. I thought that was pretty cool because I was like, oh, wow, this is a little bit of my childhood. And I said in episode 1, what I like about documentaries, what's important to me is that A, that I learned something, or B, I get to relive certain moments in my life that I remember, and then C, I'm entertained, right? And so I thought episode 1 didn't educate me very much, but I felt like it was entertained. By episode 2, I was like, this is a shit show, right? Like Bischoff is just really trying to repair his image. Episode 3, Vince Russo is trying to repair his image and he fails to do so. And I felt like I know they let him get away with a lot, but they still had some other people calling him out on it. Episode 4 was just all about how it was the AOL Time Warner is what killed WCW, and it had nothing to do with, except for one small comment that Guy Evans made. Guy Evans is the guy that wrote the Nitro book, and he co-wrote a book with not only Dave Penzer but Eric Bischoff, so you kind of know where his head's at. Where Guy Evans said, well, in the year 2000 or 1999, WCW Uncensored, they had they sold like over 300,000 pay-per-views, and then the very next year with the same main event, Hogan and Flair on top, they sold like 60,000 pay-per-views with 81% decrease. And he said that, but they glossed over it, and then they go right back to the fact that Jamie Kellner hated wrestling and didn't want anything to do with it, that Brad Siegler and Stu Snyder were, in collusion to kill the company. That way WWF could buy it, which actually might actually.
I actually do believe that.
Which actually could be a grain of truth. But what they didn't say was that people stopped watching, people stopped going, and people stopped paying for the shows, which is ultimately what killed WCW.
Mm-hmm. Apathy and stupidity killed WCW.
Yeah.
And Eric Bischoff was the leader of it for the whole time that was happening. That's the truth. Like, Jamie Kellner just passed away this past week. So the fact that he died this week is a little ironic, little apropos, we should say. It's a shame when anyone loses their life. I think he's been a bad guy to pro wrestling fans for a long time. And in reality, shows weren't good. They weren't selling tickets. It was no longer a good television program. Still did all right in the ratings, which people kind of forget. Like, we get so lost in the hype of the Monday Night Wars. Nitro was still really competitive, even when it was really bad. The problem was, like, people stopped caring. And it wasn't bad WCW that died. It was irrelevant WCW that died.
Yeah. Well, and so it was doing like okay in the ratings, like it wasn't like tanked completely. And that was a far cry from what it was, and it was at its peak, but it was still competitive. But here was the problem: it was so sleazy that they couldn't sell advertising, right? And it was so irrelevant and it was so uncool that they couldn't get advertisers to buy time on it. Honestly, this would have been so. Say that Jamie Kellner keeps it, right, and like Fusion Media is able to go through with the sale. So if you guys are, I'm talking to you guys like you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to like rehash the whole episode. So if you haven't watched the episode, or if you haven't checked out our series on the WCW invasion of the WWF in 2001, we went week by week with this whole thing. So I'm not going to rehash everything completely, but let's just say, for instance, that Fusion Media successfully purchases WCW and they get to keep their time slot on, I think it was going to be on TBS. They were not going to get to keep Nitro, but they were going to get to keep TBS, right? Say that happened. Why would Jamie Kellner and why would AOL Time Warner believe that on Eric Bischoff's third attempt to turn this thing around that he would be successful? What in his history, other than the small period that he was successful from 96 to 98, what would make them believe that he would be able to do that again when he already tried it the year before and was unsuccessful? He could not lead this company back to the promised land. Why would they think that? Honestly, if Jamie Kellner did keep it, it very likely would have continued to go down the wrong way. And I know that some people believe that maybe he would have changed and turned the thing around, but
Well,
maybe he would have, but from their point of view, why would they? Honestly, if they did keep it, they might have been looked like fools if they did keep the WCW program on TBS.
it would have still done decent ratings. It could have gone worse.